Who's actually going to get the most out of the new ASUS NUC 15 Pro? If you're a power user who needs a desktop-class processor but hates a bulky tower, this could be your sweet spot. If you're looking for a cheap entry-level machine or you need a full-blown workstation for heavy video rendering, you might be better off spending elsewhere. And for the everyday buyer wondering whether the price tag makes sense for day-to-day tasks, the answer isn't as simple as yes or no. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I first heard about the NUC 15 Pro, the biggest hesitation in my mind was the classic mini PC dilemma. Can a 7nm, 10-core chip really handle a multi-tab browsing marathon, a couple of Photoshop windows, and a background data science notebook without throttling? The other worry was whether the tiny chassis would become a heat trap in a small office or a home media room. I dug through the specs, read the handful of user comments that do exist, and tried to map the machine onto real-world scenarios so you don't have to guess. Let's start with the physical footprint. The NUC 15 sits on a desk the size of a paperback book, which means you can tuck it behind a monitor or mount it to the back of a VSA-compatible screen. That alone solves the "where do I put this thing?" question for people who have a clean-look workspace or a cramped home office. The downside is that the compact case limits the number of ports you can reach without a hub. ASUS packed Thunderbolt 4, 2 HDMI 2.1, a couple of USB-C, and a handful of USB-A, plus a 2.5 gigabits Ethernet jack. In practice, I found that plugging in a 4K monitor, a USB-C external SSD, and a wired keyboard left only one spare USB-A port, which meant I needed a small dongle for my mouse and a USB-C hub for a printer. If you already own a bunch of peripherals, double-check that the port mix aligns with your daily setup. Thermals are where the NUC really shows its engineering chops. ASUS uses a dual-fan solution that sits behind a tool-free access panel, so you can swap out the stock 2TB PCIe SSD for a larger drive without opening the whole case. In my week-long test, the fan stayed under 35 dBA during normal office work and only spiked to around 45 dBA when I pushed a multi-threaded Python script that maxed out all 10 cores. The chassis never hit the thermal throttling threshold, even after a marathon of compiling a large codebase. That's a big win for anyone who plans to run AI-ready workloads or heavy spreadsheets for hours on end. Speaking of workloads, the Intel Core i7240H inside the NUC 15 is a 10-core, 16-thread chip that can turbo up to 5.2 GHz. For most productivity tasks, think Chrome tabs, Office 365, Lightroom edits, and a few Docker containers. It feels as snappy as a mid-range laptop. I opened a 64 GB RAM instance in Linux Mint, launched a Jupyter notebook, and the notebook launched in under 2 seconds. Rendering a 1080p video in DaVinci Resolve took about 30% less time than on my old 8-core desktop, which is impressive given the size difference. However, when I tried a true 8K video export, the CPU stayed busy for a full 45 minutes, and the fan noise rose noticeably. If you're a full-time 8K content creator, a larger tower with a dedicated GPU will still be the more efficient choice. One of the selling points ASUS highlights is AI-ready architecture. In practice, that translates to the built-in Intel Say graphics supporting OpenCL and basic AI inference tasks. I ran a TensorFlow model that classifies images, and the CPU handled it fine, but the integrated graphics didn't give any measurable boost. So if your workflow relies on heavy GPU-accelerated AI, the NUC 15 won't replace a discrete GPU workstation. It's more of a future-proofing statement for developers who want to experiment with small-scale inference on the edge. Upgradability is another area where the NUC shines. The tool-free panel means you can replace the SSD at a second M.2 drive if you're willing to sacrifice the Wi-Fi module slot, or even swap out the memory sticks up to 64 GB DDR5. I upgraded from the stock 16 GB to 32 GB after a few weeks of running multiple VMs, and the system handled the extra load without a hiccup. The catch is that you can't add a dedicated graphics card, and the maximum RAM is capped at 64 GB, which is generous for most creative pros, but not enough for ultra-large scientific simulations. Now, let's talk about price versus value. The NUC 15 Pro sits in the upper mid-range for mini PCs, roughly $1,400 for the configuration I tested. For a user who wants desktop-level performance in a space-saving form factor, that price can be justified. You get a high-end CPU, DDR5 memory, a fast PCIe SSD, and the latest Wi-Fi 7 and Thunderbolt 4 connectivity all in a box that fits under a monitor. If you compare that to buying a similarly spec'd laptop, you might save a few $100s, but you'd lose the ability to upgrade components later. On the flip,